One of the age-old problems in philosophy is the problem of skepticism. How can we be certain what we experience and know is true and not an illusion or just a useful model? How do we know our knowledge is accurate and not a trick that external forces are making us believe? The usual way this is addressed is through the position of epistemic particularism, which is basically the position that our knowledge is innocent until proven guilty. There is no reason to doubt our knowledge, beliefs, and intuition unless we can find an actual reason to cause us to doubt. But what if there was a reason that could cause us to begin to doubt our beliefs? What if our beliefs led to internal contradictions and a self-defeating circle? Thankfully, not all beliefs fall into this, but if you hold to philosophical naturalism, that is in fact the case. Philosophical and evolutionary naturalism would be the belief there are no supernatural entities. The natural world is all of existence, and humans came about by accident through the blind workings of matter. We would have evolved by accident from the lower animals by passing on traits and beliefs that help us survive. As naturalist Daniel Dennett says, the mind is the brain, or more specifically, a system or organization within the brain that has evolved in much the way that our immune system, or respiratory system, or digestive system has evolved. Like many other natural wonders, the human mind is something of a bag of tricks, cobbled together over the eons by the foresightless process of evolution by natural selection. So everything that makes us who we are would have come together via natural selection to aid us in surviving. However, that would include everything about us, which includes the chemistry of the brain and how it functions. The human evolved brain would only have come about as a means to aid an organism in surviving. So if naturalism is true, everything the brain does is for survival, which must necessarily include all the beliefs and thoughts it has, which would entail the fact that all the beliefs we think are true of reality are really just formed in the brain to help us survive. But consequently, this would also include the belief in naturalism. So if you believe naturalism is true, then you also have to believe you believe naturalism is true because your brain has decided this belief is beneficial for survival, not because it is true. Thus, as Alvin Plantinga identifies, philosophical naturalism falls into a self-defeating circle, where your belief naturalism is true must entail you are a product of evolutionary naturalism alone, and therefore all your beliefs are programmed into you to help you survive, including your belief naturalism is true. In fact, several experts have identified this consequent. Philosopher Richard Rorty says, the idea that one species of organism is, unlike all the other, oriented not just towards its own increased propensity, but towards truth, is as un-Darwinian as the idea that every human being has a built-in moral compass. Time reported that biologist J.M. Smith never understood why organisms have feelings. After all, orthodox biologists believe that behavior, however complex, is governed entirely by biochemistry, and that the attendant sensations, fear, pain, wonder, love, are just shadows cast by that biochemistry, not themselves vital to the organism's behavior. Even the great Charles Darwin worried, "With me the horrid doubt always arises, whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy." But of course, the obvious objection to this is why wouldn't it be the most beneficial for survival to have an accurate, true description of reality? Surely an organism with trustworthy cognitive faculties and knowing what is true would be the most optimal way to survive. Therefore, evolution would select faculties that are designed to know truth. However, Plantinga anticipates this objection and points out the probability of this would be low, or we should remain agnostic if naturalism were true. First, there is no necessary equivocation between what is useful and what is true. Some things can be useful while not being true. Take Ptolemaic astronomy. For centuries, this model was used to help us in navigation and star charting. It was useful, but not a true description of reality. And of course, later it was replaced by a more accurate model. However, if naturalism is true, our knowledge could be analogous to Ptolemaic astronomy, simply a useful model to help us get through the world. So just because our knowledge works in practical measures, that doesn't make it true of what reality is. Take another example, qualia, specifically color. In nature, external objects reflect electromagnetic waves, which hit the human eye to create biochemical states, which is transmitted to the brain as neural patterns in the primary visual cortex. If naturalism is true, the brain would somehow create color from this data as a useful model. The original wavelengths have no color. Color is, as John Locke said, secondary qualities, or contents of the mind. They emerge when wavelengths are perceived in the eyes and created in the brain. And apart from the brain, color doesn't exist. So color is simply a useful model created by the brain, not actually what exists in nature. And if the brain does this with color, it can equally be argued it does it with our knowledge. It is not necessarily true, but a useful model we are programmed to think is true to help us survive. So we fall into a self-defeating circle. If naturalism is true, knowledge and beliefs are for surviving. So the belief in naturalism is not actually true, but only for surviving. In fact, experts in philosophy and science will note there is no reason to think truth is obtainable if naturalism were true. Philosopher John Gray says, "The human mind serves evolutionary success, not truth. To think otherwise is to resurrect the pre-Darwinian error that humans are different from all other animals. Darwinian theory tells us that an interest in truth is not needed for survival or reproduction. Truth has no systematical evolutionary advantages over error." Neuroscientist and naturalist Sam Harris says, "Our logical, mathematical, and physical intuitions have not been designed by natural selection to track truth." Patricia Churchland says it like this, "The principal chore of brains is to get the body parts where they should be in order that the organism may survive. Improvements in sensory motor control confer an evolutionary advantage. A fancier style representing the world is advantageous so long as it enhances the organism's chance for survival. Truth, whatever that is, takes the hindmost." In fact, building on our analogy with the creation of color in the brain, we can even argue true beliefs could be energy-expensive distractions, causing organisms to seek simpler models. Plantinga even argues that possessing true beliefs could be disadvantageous because such beliefs would require increased information processing versus simplified useful models, much like with the analogy of color. It is far simpler to understand color than it is to interpret different wavelengths. Dumbed-down user interface symbols can be more efficient since they require less information processing to understand. Think of computer icons versus the underlying code. Which is easier for a human mind to learn and adapt to? Which requires less brain power to understand? Likewise, our knowledge and beliefs could be dumbed-down user interface symbols for surviving and not a true picture of reality. Simply something we are programmed to think is true because thinking that way helps us survive. Now, some will argue there are certain beliefs some humans have that do not aid in surviving. The obvious example is beliefs encouraging suicide. Under naturalism, suicidal thoughts would be created by the brain, but do not aid in survival. In fact, they would create the opposite effect. So wouldn't this mean not all beliefs would be beneficial for survival? Well, the issue to remember is, under naturalism, the brain of a suicidal individual is still doing what he or she thinks is best. They have been forced to believe by brain chemistry the world is a cruel and dark place, and the best option is to escape it through death. So in a corrupt sense, they would still be thinking they are doing what is best for them, or picking beliefs that will help them to obtain the safest place. So if naturalism is true, the individual brain is still trying to obtain what is best for it, but from a malfunctioning position. And natural selection would be the process of weeding out the malfunctioning organisms, which do not obtain the best way to survive. In fact, all beliefs created by the brain would be equal in attempting to obtain the best way to survive, as that would be the goal each organism would be trying to obtain in producing beliefs. So the belief in naturalism may not be the most useful belief for survival, but it would be generated with the goal of survival in mind, not truth-finding. However, even with this simple fact, it can easily be explained how any metaphysical worldview, like naturalism or theism, can aid an organism in surviving. Because if naturalism is true, all metaphysical worldviews would give an organism a sense of safety and courage, and feeling like they understand how reality functions, and therefore be beneficial. So these are the consequences if naturalism is true. All human knowledge would be geared towards surviving, as the experts identify, and there is no reason to assume that would entail truth. Thus, philosophical naturalism has a serious problem rooted in its own implications. So what does this mean? Well, first, it obviously doesn't demonstrate that naturalism is false, nor does it prove theism. What it does show is if an individual starts with the belief that naturalism is true, then they also have to accept their beliefs came about from natural processes, which are aimed at creating useful models for surviving. Therefore, the belief in naturalism is just a useful model as well, and thus the belief in naturalism defeats itself. Truth is unobtainable, in fact meaningless to speak of. If reason is not grounded in reason, but physical blind processes, then reason itself is lost, and the very process of reasoning to naturalism or materialism is just as meaningless and defeats itself, since this would be to assume reasoning to truth works. But alternative worldviews do not suffer from these problems, since one can argue mental properties of consciousness and reasoning are irreducible and fundamental, and therefore avoid the implications of reductionism. This is why, for example, theists and idealists would not suffer the same implications, since the mind is not reducible to physical processes. Believing these things are reducible creates more problems than one can realize when you think about it. But then again, if they are reducible, are we really even thinking about it? Out by accident, through the blind workings of matter. We would have evolved by accident from the lower animals by passing on traits and beliefs that help us survive. As naturalist Daniel Dennett says, the mind is the brain, or more specifically, a system or organization within the brain and a self-defeating circle. Thankfully, not all beliefs fall into this, but if you hold to philosophical naturalism, that is in fact the case. Philosophical and evolutionary naturalism would be the belief there are no supernatural entities. The natural world is all of existence, and humans came about. How can we be certain what we experience and know is true and not an illusion or just a useful model? How do we know our knowledge is accurate and not a trick that external forces are making us believe? The usual way this is addressed is through the position of epistemic particularism, which is basically the position that our knowledge is innocent until proven guilty. There is no reason to doubt our knowledge, beliefs, and intuition unless we can find an actual reason to cause us to doubt. But what if there was a reason that could cause us to begin to doubt our beliefs? What if our beliefs led to internal contradiction? One of the age-old problems in philosophy is the problem of skepticism.